Totally. And it's all about free will. Like, no, it's all good. I'm loving this conversation because it's all about free will. It's beautiful. We have a choice about what we experience. I've seen that in my own relationships when I used to go into conflicts with people in my life and I was like telling a story of they're never going to change. Like they're inherently messed up. Or even just, they're a jerk. What do I get back? I get a confirmation of that deeply held belief. I get a replay of the same cycle. If I go in and I say, well, in the past, they've done nothing but be a jerk to me, but I'm willing to have a different experience. Like I'm willing to be willing. Just open the door a little bit. I'm willing to be shown that this person isn't a total jerk. We can bring that energy, right? But just even that spaciousness to say, I'm open to another outcome. And that is ultimately what guides all of my social change work as I look at the stories we're telling. Are we telling just consistently, we're doomed, we're doomed, we're doomed. We're so messed up as a species. Like, can you believe how messed up we are? We're just going to destroy ourselves. And it's like we can honor that that's a piece of our experience, just like I honor that people have harmed me. But we can also say, am I willing to tell a story that we've made a mess of it, but we're going to turn it around because we are that capable. We are that strong.
All right. Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the Look Up podcast. I'm your host, Mark Weinstein. I just want to take the opportunity to say thank you for listening along. We're now on the 12th episode, and I've got a few more coming your way, one per week over the next 4 weeks. It's been such a great journey so far, and I'm really appreciative to all of you listeners who keep coming back. And the audience is growing, and it's just been really fun. The best part has been meeting all of these incredible people along the way. I want to give a quick shout out to my sound engineer, Sam Palumbo, also known as Patch Kid. He's the creator of the intro music as well. Check him out on Spotify and other platforms. So on this episode, I had the pleasure of interviewing Aaron Rose. Aaron was introduced to me by my previous guest, Jesse Israel, and as you guys heard, Jesse's recommendation shouldn't be ignored. He's a great guy, and so I immediately agreed to chat with Aaron without really knowing much about him. But Aaron is a motivational speaker, transformational coach for other public speakers, a writer, and an educator. In addition to managing inclusive culture design for organizations, Aaron's also an energy worker and a meditation teacher. His work is rooted in an intersectional understanding of power and research-backed principles of behavioral and organizational psychology. I couldn't be happier to have been introduced to him because for me, this was one of the most powerful conversations that I've had to date. He and I explored a broad range of subjects that sometimes bordered on the controversial. We discussed the multidimensionality of our personalities, identity politics, free will, manifestation, and how we're currently unwinding generations of unconscious social biases. This was the first episode where I really dove into politics, and Aaron and I discussed Marianne Williamson's bid for the Democratic nomination. The show toes the line between objective and subjective learning and between the physical and the metaphysical. We even discussed experiments in the power of prayer and its ability to transcend our linear understanding of time. And as you can tell, things got a little bit heady, but it was super enjoyable and I learned a ton. I want to share with you before I drop off a few of Aaron's truths. Aaron said that love is the only real thing. Unity is the natural state of humanity, and our earth was once the Garden of Eden, and Aaron holds a belief that we can bring it back to that state. As always, if you have suggestions, if you have comments, please let me know. You can reach out directly to me at mark@thelookuppodcast.com, marc@thelookuppodcast.com. Again, thanks for your time, and without further ado, this is Aaron Rose. Aaron Rose, thank you for coming on the Lookup podcast. It's
Thank
a
you for having
pleasure
me.
to meet you. As we were just discussing, this is the first time we've seen each other, so it's great. We were connected through my last guest, Jesse Israel from the Big Quiet, and he immediately after talking sent this like raving email about how you and I needed to connect, that you needed to be on the Lookup show, and just had nothing but great things to say about you and the work that you did together. So I feel lucky to have you on, and I think that those listening will feel the same.
I'm glad to be here, and I love Jesse, and he's got an A+ recommendation in my book.
Yeah, for sure. So I guess a good place to start might just be why don't you tell us and listeners a little bit about yourself, and then we can kind of dive into some of what you've been working on lately and go from there.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm Aaron Rose. These days, I'm a transformational coach for public figures. I'm an energy worker and an intuitive. I'm a writer. I'm a speaker. I do inclusive culture design work for organizations. And all of that is really coming at this question of why can't humans get along, and sort of these patterns of exclusion and violence that we've all been experiencing for generations and generations that are encoded into us on a DNA level. How do we decondition that within our lifetime? We are called to do that in this moment. And I'm here to support people in answering the call. Everybody from the average person who's just like, my boss is driving me crazy, or this person said something homophobic to me on the train, to big public figures who are really being called to a higher standard of authenticity and integrity during these moments when, on Instagram, anybody can pile on them and say that they've done something messed up. And so a lot of my work has moved into the online space as well these days, because that is where this identity-based conflict is really playing out online. And really just, I'm looking at my phone here, just in this little trigger machine that we're all carrying around these days.
Yeah, it's such a trigger machine. I mean, I saw something interesting. I think it was Jay Shetty posted just yesterday, which was trying to get people to stop looking at their phone first thing in the morning. And he was basically like, would you let 100 people just walk into your room right when you wake up? So why are you letting them walk right into your mind? And I think that's really great. And I think we're starting to see a lot of people, really speak out against the side effects of our cell phones or trigger machines in our pockets. I like the way you just define that. So it's natural. I think it's natural that the work that you've done has kind of extended into the social media sphere or the tech sphere, because it's also like, in some ways, I feel like the worst of us is brought out through social media platforms. It's just easier to say something digitally than you would to someone's face. But yeah, I mean, I'm curious, how did you kind of find your way into this work?
Mm. And I will say, just to respond to that piece of it, bringing out the worst of us, I think it brings out the worst and the best of us, like any human relationship, and like any relationship that's new, where we don't have sort of the new paradigm of how we're being conscious and intentional about every aspect, and we haven't quite mapped all of the ways that we get pulled away from our most authentic self. I think we're seeing a lot of the worst. But in other ways, I really think like when you fall in love with someone and you're just like, you're the best, we're doing this. And then 3 months later, you're like, are you the worst, or am I the worst? Or is it both of us? Like we end up triggered by the people who love us most, and the people who see us, and it creates this sort of laboratory for change. So I'm all about using social media, using the online space as a tool for creating the life in the world that we want, because it's not going anywhere. And to answer this question of how I got into what I do now, it's really been quite an organically iterative process. I say that I sort of came into the world asking the question, why can't we get along? Like, what is happening here? I had this deep internal sense. I was raised in the Catholic Church, and I remember even being 3, 4 years old and having this sense of almost sort of pieces being out of alignment in my body when I was in a church. Because I was like, okay, you're speaking about love, but I don't really feel that. I'm not seeing that modeled in the behavior of the people around me. I'm feeling actually very constrained, very separated from myself, very separated from other people, and seeing people in the world around me and in my personal life treat each other terribly, and just having this sense of like, this doesn't compute. And in the same way that some kids come into the world and they're like, I'm going to Mars, or I want to cure cancer, or I just want to make cool stuff, or I want to make art. For me, this question of sort of hacking, which is an overused term, but truly getting to the bottom of human hate and the dysfunction that so many people label as our inherent nature, which some part of me said from a very early age, this is not how it's supposed to be. This isn't our natural state. So how do we get back to it? And that led me, the solutions that were first presented to me, or the way I first got very engaged, was around sort of traditional social justice organizing. Even at 14, 15, I was going around to different classrooms in my high school and giving presentations about how to think globally and act locally. We would say, okay, there's this big issue happening: hunger, genocide, malaria. What can you, random 15-year-old in high school, do about it? How can we raise your awareness, but then give you a way to take action? And I ended up in very traditional sort of community organizing spaces, and ultimately sort of transitioned out of those spaces by the time I was in my early 20s, because I was feeling really burned out, and I was feeling really still, it was like this quest to get to the bottom of injustice wasn't fully satisfied in that space, because I was seeing my fellow organizers not treat each other well. I was seeing these sacrifices made where it was like, okay, well, we have to not pay you enough and not feed you enough and not sleep enough because it's the revolution. And some part of me was hearing this chorus of Gandhi and everybody else who's ever said that our ends are a reflection of the means that we use to reach towards them. And so this sense of like, how can I work for social change in a way that makes my life a living, breathing, moment by moment expression of the change that I'm seeking to create, really drove me into kind of the next more self-defined phase of my work, which has included having titles like life coach, diversity and inclusion educator, activist, writer, spiritual teacher, metaphysician, all of the above. And it's still evolving every day.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack in what you just said. I think, one thing that you brought to mind is recently kind of the Bernie Sanders campaign, and how, there was almost this gotcha moment with the Bernie Sanders campaign about how he was not paying his staffers minimum wage. And, the whole thing got resolved. I think in the end, the solution they used was you just have to work fewer hours as a staffer, which is, fine, because they unionized, right? So now he's dealing with union negotiations through the process of his election. And maybe he's showing a way forwards. But it is interesting. I think in kind of like VC parlance, they use the term dog fooding. Right. It's like, if you're building a product for someone, build it for yourself. If you're building a social movement, you need to live and act that movement on a daily basis. And, I think I saw one of your posts from today, actually, and I'd love to talk about it, about sharing authentically. And how most people perceive sharing authentically online to be about this kind of almost like, and I'm guilty of this as well. It's like when I say I'm being authentic, it's only when I'm posting these like almost like self-deprecating, posts, or, just like it's easier for me to be quote unquote vulnerable about, flaws than to be like, I'm sitting in my power. So I really liked you kind of saying, hey, I'm being authentic. And I'm sitting in my power, and I'm feeling strong and great. And I want to share that with you as well, and not shying away from that. And I think, again, that's a form of acting out what you speak as well.
Thank you. I'm glad that resonated with you. And I think, everybody, we're such multi-dimensional, multifaceted beings that your authenticity growth edge one day may be that vulnerable post. That's definitely an axis along which I'm continuing to sort of push myself and say, where am I filtering my life because of some made up idea of the critique that might come? And how might some previously unacknowledged aspect of me benefit from me acknowledging myself through sharing it with the world, not through posting it and saying, okay, I'll feel validated when I have, 300 likes or whatever, but saying, how can I give myself the gift of the recognition of creating in some ways sort of a piece of art on Instagram about what I'm experiencing in a more vulnerable way, but then also seeing, there's this sense, one of my least favorite phrases that the kids these days are saying is some version of I'm trash, or that person's trash, or this sort of way that we joke about our inadequacy. And it's this paradoxical balance, like any truth, where, we do have to acknowledge that we're deeply flawed human beings on some level, and we're always striving to be better, and we're cleaning up, I don't know, thousands of generations of not treating each other well through the laboratory of our own lives in this lifetime. So there's a lot of mess, but there's also a lot of beauty, and there's a lot of glory, and there's a lot of pride that we can have in being powerful and in redefining power. It's not power over, it's power with. It's I shine and you shine, and we get to shine together.
Completely. It's it's interesting thinking about kind of, you do a lot of work with the institutionalization of some of these constructs, these social ideas. I'd love if you could kind of talk a little bit about that. You just kind of touched on the tip of the iceberg with it. As you mentioned, in this lifetime, we're all trying to almost unwind thousands of years of social programming that gets passed down. What work are you doing right now? And how is that process moving forward as far as helping individuals unwind these unconscious biases?
So it's happening in every moment across many different axes. The place where the work is happening more in an institutional way for me right now is with my corporate clients, or just my organizational clients who are looking at, okay, and I work with a lot of startups who are now sort of former startups who are now in the sort of 150 plus employee range, where they built really, really, really fast based on their existing networks, and they're sort of looking around and they're saying, okay, what culture do we really want to be having here? And actually, we're already playing out our biases on each other. We're already big enough to see the big gaps in who's here, who's being represented, who's being given the space to lead and create. And so there's that piece, working with organizations, and then there's really working with individuals and understanding whether that's an individual who's one person but with 1 million Instagram followers, and so is sort of this human megaphone to the masses, or other folks who are following me on Instagram or coming to my public events who are really human beings without a big public platform, but are navigating the arena of social change in their life, which is their intimate relationships, which is ultimately where it starts for all of us. And so the way that I navigate the work is this balance between really looking at the laws of metaphysics, the unseen laws that govern our universe, and understanding that anything that's happening outside is happening inside. So how can I use that as sort of medicine to apply it to any identity-based breakdown that's happening? So for example, I had a client who came to me, and she was in the wellness space, spirituality space, and she said, I'm really afraid that people are going to tell me that I'm racist or that I'm homophobic because I don't have, I mostly have white straight people on my platform. And it's not that I don't love those people, but for whatever reason, my platform is really kind of narrow in its representation. And she was identifying that as a problem for herself and wanting to work on it. And she was like, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do. Like, I put it out there, I invite people to share, and they don't want to be part of my community. And what we did was go into a subconscious hypnotic state. Even literally, you can do this in 30 seconds, and it makes a difference to go in and to say, first of all, what stories from your childhood and also your sort of ancestry, the people who came before you, are you still running within yourself that are saying, like, what would you have to believe to be true in order to be experiencing this? Oh, it's not safe to be in communities with people who look differently than me. I won't receive love. I won't receive praise. I won't get what I need if I am intimate and close with people who are different than me, and tracing those back and starting to bring the light of truth in a variety of different ways to those stories, and saying, okay, how can I affirm that the truth of my human experience is actually that it's safe to be myself with people who don't look like me? And the second piece that we did in that session was we did a loving kindness meditation. We dropped visually from the mind into the heart, seeing the light and the strength there, and sending that love out to the people that she was experiencing this sort of perceived conflict with, and sending them love and just saying, may you be happy, may you be safe. And in the same way that we like dig into a muscle knot, it's like you energetically kind of push through this feeling of block, this feeling of constriction related to a certain group of people. And it was this surrender. It wasn't, we're doing this so that, it was like, we're doing this to restore love to this situation. That was the pure intention. And within 24 hours, I had an email from her saying, oh my God, out of nowhere, 5 different people reached out asking if they could contribute to my site. And they're all people of color, LGBTQ people, etc. And it was like, as soon as she released that internal block and did a bit of that work to clear that subconscious patterning from within her, everything that she was calling in, everything that was a match to who she truly is as a human, just came pouring on in. It just showed up. And the third piece, in addition to kind of that, the identifying the unloving, the fearful beliefs, and doing this sort of energetic work that I just described, this sending of the love, is this third piece of amends making and looking at, okay, if I actually want to be someone who is in a more diverse community, where do I need to repair anything from my past? You know, even if it's that when I was 10, I like laughed at a homophobic joke. What do I need to do to go back? And whether that's an apology to someone, or truly just feeling into the remorse and letting it go, or even saying, how can I make a living amends? What do I need to do if we're talking about LGBTQ issues here, as we were with this client? What do I need to do to better support that community? What support are they asking for in this moment? And so it's sort of this balance between the external actions, and most people who are looking at identity-based stuff or managing PR for, or sort of reputation management for public figures at this point, it's all about the external. This is the best practice, say this, do this. But if we don't address what's happening on an internal level, we're just going to keep creating the same cycle over and over and over again. So there's a lot of power. My work completely changed when I started to really understand that everything that's happening outside is first happening inside, and that's where we have to pull it out at the root.
So let's talk about that a little bit, because earlier you mentioned, I think what you described as kind of the law, some laws of metaphysics, and now what I'm hearing you say, especially in this anecdote, is that when we change our internal, it has a powerful, almost magic impact on our external. Yeah. And in some ways, this is as old as time or human memory, because that's what prayer is. Exactly. Right? And we've always been, as long as we can remember through the history of human culture, there's been some element of prayer or, offering made. And I guess we recognize the subconscious power of that. So I'd love to hear your thought, but of course we live in this the flip side is we live in this time period where, we are so fundamentally dependent on science, and kind of that Western knowledge to prove that this metaphysics is true, that there are going to be, listeners that will be skeptical of some of these concepts. And I'm sure you come across that as well. And I often hesitate to even describe my beliefs on the power of manifestation and what I've experienced when I've changed my internal, slightly similar situation to, your client in that example. So, long-winded way of saying, would love to hear your thoughts on kind of these metaphysical rules, or at least one of them, about internal reflecting external and vice versa.
Yeah, there's so much that you said there, and I identify and I resonate with that sense of, how people receive this information right now, and this sense of this skepticism, seeing it as woo-woo, seeing it as not real, seeing it as it is not grounded. It's very sort of masculine critique in some ways, which is not about gender. It's just about that masculine polarity of facts and action and logic. And so I find myself, and I am a logical person, and that is actually what I love the most about what I've come to understand about the world, is that it just makes sense, right? There is this deep mathematical logic to the universe, right? Scientists are even beginning to map what the space between you and me looks like, how it constructs itself, how it has these sacred geometry patterns that we see mimicked all throughout nature. And so I love to be on a quest I love to have that balance, right? And to look for the research that shows people. So we have these studies now that show that when large groups of people gather together and meditate, violent crime rates go down in the surrounding area.
Wow.
Which is just so amazing.
Where were these studies done, or like?
It's been, I think the study that's coming to mind was in Washington, D.C. in the 1990s. And, I reach for the research, and I also am not so versed in the research lingo that I can justify, is it double blind? How many times was it validated? I'm not sure, but I know in my heart that when people drop into their hearts with a positive intention, it changes the world around us, because there's no such thing as neutrality either. Like, either you're thinking a loving thought or you're thinking a fearful thought. Either you're wishing for the removal of a negative stimuli, or you're wishing for the introduction of a positive stimuli. And so, a lot of it is about taking our power back as humans, taking back that conscious power. And a study that I'll share about prayer as well. Like, prayer is that loaded word. I mean, I was raised in the Catholic Church, and I spent a lot of time just shunning anything that had that flavor of it. But my quest for freedom and for liberation has brought me to a place where I'm like, you don't get to take prayer from me. You don't get to take grace from me. You don't get to take wonder and a connection to a sense of something greater and to a prime creator or the universe, however you think about it. You don't get to take that from me, because it is what's true. It's just been distorted in various ways. So I love prayer. In some ways, what I described with a loving kindness meditation is just prayer, right? It is just dropping into your heart and sending a loving thought to someone else. There's a study that some people, there's all kinds of critiques of it, but there was a study that captivated me on the level of the imagination about people who, basically, there was a group of people who were sick. They all had sepsis. They were in the hospital. And there was a group of people who, they did a study praying for these people. And so some people who were sick were assigned someone to pray for them, and some people were not. And what they found is that the people who were prayed for experienced much greater rates of recovery. They had a higher survival rate and all of that. And we have a couple of studies now that show that praying for people in dire situations does shift the outcome. But the kicker with this study is that the people who were sick were in the past, and the people who were praying were in the future. They randomly scrambled people's names from a couple of years before, and then assigned randomly people who had been sick to be prayed for. And the people who were prayed for did have better outcomes. And so it shows us, it's like, it boggles the mind to describe it a little bit, but basically the people who were prayed for 5 years after they were sick got better at a much higher rate than the people who were not prayed for, which shows us
they had already gotten better before they were prayed for, or they got better after they were prayed for.
They had already gotten better. So it's sort of like this whole group of people was sick. They had their outcome, and then it was completely random who was assigned to be prayed for as this experiment retroactively.
Oh, interesting. To see like if prayer could penetrate the fourth dimension of time.
Exactly. And so it to me, it's a poetic illustration of the illusion of time, right? We're living in a linear time situation, but, from whether it's the Buddhists saying that, when you resolve your karma, you heal it 7 generations back and 7 generations forward, or epigeneticists talking about clearing generational trauma from our cells.
You sent me down a rabbit hole.
Yeah.
Because I fundamentally, and as you described in my heart center, believe in, certain concepts, but there is also this so you sent me down the rabbit hole of epigenetics. That's what I'm going to say.
Great. Let's go.
I'm going to bring up one kind of woo-woo study that's often described, that's not epigenetics, because it's frustrating to me as someone that lives on kind of the connection between the heart and the mind, and sometimes leans a lot more kind of like in that masculine, as you described, like logical, facts-based, and other times is like, I want to believe, I do believe, and I experience magic. This one experiment, it's the experiment of the gentleman that used to talk to his water, and he would say nice things to his water.
Dr. Emoto.
Yeah, and the water molecules would change. And, this is often quoted in kind of, spiritual communities as the power of prayer and the power of words and thought patterns and intention. But I feel like there's also equal studies on the other side that are like, it's because there was an N of 1, and they're attacking the scientific rigor of this man's study, and it hasn't been able to be replicated. And then I'm like, okay, well, it hasn't been able to be replicated because now you're putting, this rational wrapper in a lab setting around something that's heart and love centered. So like, yes, this man that was truly putting love and compassion into his water was actually changing the chemical composition. But then people that were trying to prove it, maybe there was something missing that we couldn't understand. That's the heart-centered Mark trying to justify. But the point being is there's all of this, like, I hate to use this word, like pseudoscience out there in the spiritual community. And I think that in order for us to penetrate through to as many people as possible, we also need to be open to their skepticism. So that's a long-winded way of saying I went down this rabbit hole of epigenetics, and I was like, okay, like I am a third generation descendant of Holocaust survivors. My mother's great aunts met in Auschwitz. They introduced each of their siblings, my grandfather and my grandmother, who then had my mother. And I believe that there is trauma that's been passed down through the generations. And I believe that it's more than just a story that's been told or cultural. There's also like traits, whether it be excess anxiety or fears or guilt and shame and things like that. Well, survivor guilt as well, because that's part of PTSD. I fundamentally believe that. So I want to believe this. So I started looking up at, going down the epigenetics rabbit hole, and it was encouraging. Some study, like the Holocaust studies that had been done, again, had been criticized because it was too small of a population from a scientific perspective to really prove anything. But now they're starting to have studies coming out for animal testing that is really proving this. Anyways, I'm going to stop there because I am kind of blabbering. I want to give you an opportunity to speak on this, but it's something I often go back and forth on. when it comes to like the desire to believe and be inspired and imaginative, and then also kind of the perception of wanting to be logical and rational as well.
I love this conversation. I love how deep we're going, because this is the stuff I really love to speak about. And so the first thing that I want to sort of anchor in is that as human beings, we have been taught to outsource our intuition to other things. We have a perfectly beautiful guidance system within us, that is our gut, that is our heart. And so whenever we're speaking about these concepts, I always like to say to people, I'm not here to convince you. And I truly want you to let your experience be your guide. So anybody who's listening, who's sort of side-eyeing the conversation, or, half side-eyeing, but half like, ooh, interesting, intriguing, let your experience be your guide. I have the results that I have with my clients, and their reaction is what tells me that what I'm doing makes a difference, right? When we go in and we say, okay, to a major public figure who's continuously getting called out on social media, and we say, okay, what part of you still believes that you deserve to be punished and humiliated? Where did that pattern come from? What part of you still believes that it's only possible to be successful for a certain period of time? What part of you believes that if people saw who you really were, that they wouldn't love you? And when we go to that root and we dig into the patterning around defensiveness, the patterning around humiliation, the patterning around shame, and we clear it through a variety of techniques, the external experience changes in ways that is miraculous. And it often, it changes in a moment, and it often can take time as well. And so I just want to sort of anchor that in, that if there's skepticism, it's like honor where you're at, and continue to take a chance on new ideas if you feel compelled, if you're willing to have a new experience. That's the other thing I say to people is, what have you been doing so far? What outcomes has that led to in your life? What do you truly want to experience in your life? Okay, more abundance, more ease, more connection, world peace within our lifetimes, the eradication of climate change, all of it. What results have you been getting with what you're doing so far? And not in a way of blaming and shaming, but saying, okay, would I be willing to consider something completely different that might shift my experience? Would I be willing to try that on? And so I like to offer that to people first, just to really get us into a place of sovereignty and empowerment with all of this. I love the Dr. Emoto study, which is, for those of you listening, you can look it up. But basically, the water that he spoke lovingly to made all these beautiful crystals. The water that he spoke very negatively to and was like, I hate you, started to get moldy and gross. And the water that he neglected, that he didn't do anything to, that he like cold shouldered, was the worst. It was the grossest. And as human beings, whatever percentage we are, it's like at least 70% water. That study's been used to sort of to really validate this idea that our intention does create the world that we're in. And in terms of whether or not that study is replicable, people do it every day in their own homes, right? They do it with plants. I love you, plant one. I hate you, plant two. And they watch the plant two die, and they watch the plant one grow. And intention is everything. So if I'm going into a study and my intention is to invalidate Dr. Emoto, the universe is like, rightio, let's create the circumstances in which we invalidate that theory. Just in the same way that when you go into an argument and you're like, there's no way this person's going to convince me, like they're wrong, or they're an asshole.
And you mentioned,
get
hypnotism earlier.
Yeah.
I've had experience with hypnotists, like in group settings, that they say this up front. They're like, if you are not open to being hypnotized, I can't hypnotize you, which is kind of interesting as well.
Totally. And it's all about free will. Like, no, it's all good. I'm loving this conversation because it's all about free will. It's beautiful. We have a choice about what we experience. I've seen that in my own relationships, when I used to go into conflicts with people in my life and I was like telling a story of they're never going to change. Like they're inherently messed up, or even just, they're a jerk. What do I get back? I get a confirmation of that deeply held belief. I get a replay of the same cycle. If I go in and I say, well, in the past, they've done nothing but be a jerk to me, but I'm willing to have a different experience. Like I'm willing, or even I'm willing to be willing. Just open the door a little bit. I'm willing to be shown that this person isn't a total jerk. We can bring that energy, right? But just even that spaciousness to say, I'm open to another outcome. And that is ultimately what guides all of my social change work, as I look at the stories we're telling. Are we telling just consistently, we're doomed, we're doomed, we're doomed. We're so messed up as a species. Like, can you believe how messed up we are? We're just going to destroy ourselves. And it's like we can honor that that's a piece of our experience, just like I honor that people have harmed me. But we can also say, am I willing to tell a story that we've made a mess of it, but we're going to turn it around because we are that capable. We are that strong.
Yeah, it's a fascinating subject on the power of manifestation, on the circular nature of our internal and external worlds, how the external affects the internal, but vice versa as well, and kind of on and on and on. And I always come back to kind of the practice of yoga, because that's kind of what I've been trained in when it comes to the spiritual sciences, and yoga really is fundamentally, in my opinion, a science of self with an n equal 1 over a certain course of time, an individual's lifetime or multiple lifetimes, or lineage or whatever. And what I find really fascinating is, when science proves some of the, these ancient experiential truths. One factor I like to point to is, if you look at the chakra system that the yoga practitioners of the past have described without cutting people open, the chakra centers, most of them have a physical corollary in bundles of nerve endings in those regions. And also, the glandular system aligns really, really well with the chakras. So your seventh chakra at the top of your head is your pineal gland, which is the gland that regulates the pituitary gland, which is your sixth chakra, or your third eye in between your eyebrows. And that gland is the gland that regulates all of the other glands in your body, including your thyroid gland, which is at your fifth chakra in your throat. And of course, you have your heart and the vagus nerve, which aren't your glands, but that's one chakra, and the vagus nerve, or the vagus nerve. Anyways, so, one mission that I have in this life, and one reason why I do this show, I think, is I really want to help create a language that can show individuals that are rational, intelligent, and believe themselves to be so, that are not open to this sort of practice or thinking, that there is logic behind it, and that there is evidence behind it. And maybe that experiential evidence is enough, or should be enough, as you said. Let's try it out, just have the willingness to be willing and open the door and see what happens. But I also, in this kind of journey, that wanting to, I'm more along the lines of wanting to help convince. Whereas you're saying, I'm not trying to convince you. I'm saying, no, I want to help convince people that this stuff is real, that magic is real, because there is a sense of magic and wonder in this world and in this universe, and I've experienced it. And so, I don't know. It's interesting. It's a fascinating kind of world that we're living in. The podcast universe in particular has like the entire spectrum.
Completely. Well, and what I'll throw in there too is, like, from one level, and I work in sort of a multidimensional, taking many perspectives. From one perspective, I do want to convince people. It's literally my entire life's mission to heal the separation of humanity through reconnecting us with our power, through re-inspiring people to see the wonder and the beauty of this world, to take it seriously, to take themselves seriously, to come back to their free will power, and to realize that we are all collectively co-creating the experience that we're having. But I know if I, as a metaphysician, right, if I bring the energy of the only acceptable outcome is that I watch you pair it back to me what I've just said to you, or I see you change in X amount of time, then that's strangling the wonder and the magic out of it. It's disrespecting people's free will. And so, I really try to live my life as a son, right? As a living, breathing example where my life is an invitation to get curious about these subjects, to have a change in experience. And I do push people every once in a while, but only when there's already a willingness, only when we're already in a conversation. Because I also trust that I didn't have all of these awarenesses 10 years ago. And it was through my own path of following my own intuition and my own divine moments of grace that I got to the awareness that I have now. And it means so much to me because it's my experience. And so and anytime someone tried to beat me over the head with something, that's the sort of tainted experience along the path, even if there was truth in what they were saying. So I do want to convince people, and also I have to respect the laws of how this thing works, and allow people to have their experience in their own unique timing, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. And I'm inspired by, your description of yourself as kind of multidimensional. And I think that bringing it back to some of the work that you do with these public personas is one of the problems of being a public figure is that oftentimes it is really challenging to break through to your audience or to the world as a multidimensional character. Individuals get typecasted, whether it be in a movie or in life. And, I actually was just listening to another podcast with a gentleman named Eric Weinstein, who was describing Madonna and David Bowie as two incredible artists that were able to reinvent themselves regularly and say, that Madonna from the early 80s was like your Madonna, and you could keep it, and that's great, but I need to keep moving forward. And mid 80s Madonna is different and whatever. And so, I've been experiencing this personally as well. After this fire documentary, my Instagram following took off, which was an ironic twist because I was speaking out against influencer culture in some ways in my participation in that documentary. And then they showed a post of something that I did from the island that I kept up on my feed because I had nothing to hide, and people were intrigued by that. And it's been fascinating because I was like, okay, I have this little platform, and then I in some ways reacted to it. And that was part of the inception of this podcast. But I felt like this was one of the greatest gifts that I could give back, sharing people like you in these conversations, with this new audience. And what's been fascinating as well is a couple of things. One is watching as I've shared more of my truths and what interests me, watching those numbers actually peak and then decline. There was nothing more painful at the beginning of all of a sudden watching, 1,000 people unfollow me after a post because they just didn't care. As you said, I felt like the neglected water more than the disliked water even. And that was really interesting. Going back to what I've always been posting on Instagram as well, which is I love posting pictures of traveling somewhere and feeling like I can't post that unless I'm also making a claim about social media at the same time, right? And so throwing the baby out with the bathwater in some ways. So that's been an interesting personal exploration of that multidimensionality that you describe, and how challenging it is as a quote unquote public figure, because I'm really not that. But yeah, I don't know. It's cool. I like the way you describe things.
Yeah, thank you. That's to me like I'm just sort of laughing over here because that what laughing at the wonder of the world, like you displayed such a release of attachment around social media. You were like, I'm calling this stuff out. I'm being me. And the universe is like, boom, great. We have a non-attached individual here. You know, you're not like, I need the 30,000 followers. And then all of a sudden there they are. Um, which is really funny. And you know what I always there's a couple of quotes that came to mind. One is from Audre Lorde, famous Black feminist scholar, who says, "Nothing that I accept fully about myself can be used to diminish me." And then pairing that with this A Course in Miracles quote, the metaphysical text A Course in Miracles, in my defenselessness, my safety lies. And understanding that anytime we're trying to convince people to accept us, to love us, to see a certain thing, we're energetically repelling people. And so when I work with public figures, we look at, okay, what parts of you do you feel like are not being seen here? How can we anchor those in your life external of the public persona, right? How can you be seen as the travel guy and the guy with the cute kids and the mad scientist doc from Back to the Future, like tinkering in your lab, and the baseball fan, or whatever, all these different things. How can we anchor those within you so that you're not seeking primary validation from your community about it? And then it frees you up to do the David Bowie thing and the Madonna thing of just being like, I literally don't care if you keep following me. I just have to be me. And people are magnetized to that authenticity. So it's paradoxical in some ways.
Absolutely. And I've actually started, speaking of like flipping the internal, internal conversation and how it affects the external, it's almost the unfollows have stalled when I decided I'm actually going to get excited when people unfollow me when I'm posting things that I care about. I was like, I'm just going to see how low I can go from here, because I expected it in some ways, because most people, like, it was just a curiosity about seeing one photo. And Fire now is like 8 months ago, right? Like the media machine moves really quickly. Nobody cares about that anymore, which is fine with me. But so I created this game of like, okay, I'm just going to post and see for myself, how many hundred people I can lose at a time. And then all of a sudden it like stopped for the time being, which was cool. I also I was thinking before of, we were talking about kind of, again, multidimensionality, like I'm here having a conversation with you and really enjoying it. And I've read some of what you post and some of the work that you do with the Me Too movement. And we're talking about some of this, spiritual side of the world. And then I also, I love listening to, say, like a Sam Harris, who is completely, attacked by, in my opinion, by a lot of people on the left political, left spectrum, when I don't think he is really a far right guy at all or a right wing guy at all. And he would talk about identity politics and science, and so would this Eric Weinstein guy who I just started listening to. But then I'm not bridging the gap, but I have one foot in this other community, and it's I don't know. It's like I really love that you encourage people to be multidimensional. But like, what do you think about that? Like, are you someone that thinks that Sam Harris is like attacking maybe the Muslim community or the Black community or the trans community, or whatever? I don't know. What are your thoughts there?
It's a great question, and I have like a half completed Walt Whitman quote in my head from Leaves of Grass, where he says something like, "Am I confusing? Well, very well then, I'm confusing." When he's talking about, I contain multitudes. It's not confusing. He says something else, but people can go explore it on their own. So I'm of the belief that left or right people with strong opinions about what we're supposed to do about this whole identity conflict thing are all fundamentally responding to the same core sense of human bafflement about our amnesia, about our unity, right? So you have people, and I'm not super, I don't want to speak super directly to Sam Harris because I haven't been up to date on exactly what he's saying, but energetically what I feel from him, and, even someone like Jordan Peterson, or these sort of hyper rationalist people who are just like, it's highly illogical that you would require me to treat you in a different way based on your identities. They're responding to a deep core sense of unity, of the fact that the ways that we separate each other are true about this current plane of human existence, but don't speak to the ultimate truth of our experience, which is that there is so much more that unites us, even in this human realm, than there is that divides us. And this sense of almost existential, it's almost like an itch, it's like an itch you can't scratch, this existential angst of like, why are we more divided now, and then more divided, and now you have more words for what you want me to call you, and I feel more separate from you, and like the days of just walking down the street and saying howdy to someone are gone. And so I see them on that side, and then I see folks who, they might describe as social justice warriors. I used to be one of them, who are saying, you need to get your vocabulary right. You need to take these specific actions. You need to validate me in this specific way. They are also responding to that same existential confusion and rage and sadness about our separation. They're saying, why won't you see me as me? Right? Why won't you see? And by seeing me as me, you're seeing me as an equal, right? Because I see you, right? So I need you to see me as me. And so it's sort of like this two sides of the same coin. And from my perspective, people who are really raging against identity politics right now, I want to know who their ancestors were and who they were in a past life, because I find that it's like we need to touch base with the diversity. We have to fully validate people for their authentic self-expression. We have to look at what trauma, what encodement am I carrying, me as a white man? What's the legacy of people who have looked like me and what they've done to, let's just say, Black women? And how can I actually fully repair that by looking at Black women in my life and saying, I honor your pain, and I'm not going to repeat the autopilot where I say that your pain is invalid and that you're crazy, right? And so these moments where we can, but where people get stuck is like, okay, are you just going to validate people's pain forever? Well, from one perspective, yes, that's what it means to be human, is to not turn away from each other no matter what's going on. But from another perspective, I see the alchemical power of just giving people that moment of witnessing and looking at how can I make a living amends to groups of people that I've been held in separation from. How can I release the idea that our well-being is a zero-sum game? How can I release that from my body? And then we get to the unity. Then we can just actually get to, okay, you're white, they're Black, I'm gay, you're straight, whatever it might be, and get to other things that we love, like watching sunsets and talking about quantum physics. But if we continue to reject the effect without looking at the cause, it's like, I don't want all these angry people who are angry about identity. It's like, okay, well, we have to look at the cause of that. We have to go back and mend that. And then we're going to, all those radio transmitters sending out that separation from within us, from, within our world, they're going to turn off, and we're actually going to be able to experience what we want. So I look forward to continuing to be in conversation with and actually work specifically with guys like Sam Harris and Jordan Peterson, because they're not wrong from one perspective, but they have an invitation to connect with their humanity in a way that they're not.
Well, I think there's a couple of things there, because the one thing I do want to say is, like, I listened I have listened to Sam Harris for a long time, longer before I listened to Jordan Peterson, and I do think that they are very different, and that's why they're often going head to head these days. And it's funny because they attract similar audiences, and I'm potentially a white male, that could be considered a brown male. I don't know, and I have my own sets of privileges that I've been given in life, and I come from a middle class family and never needed anything. But I wouldn't even group Sam and Jordan together. I would say, like, when I hear Sam Harris speak, it's more just like it's more neutral even than Jordan Peterson.
Yeah.
Jordan Peterson's going after a certain population, whereas Sam, I think, is more just feeling under attack by. It's like I downloaded his meditation app, Waking Up. I used it. I mentioned it in a consciousness group that I started, and a very good friend of mine was like, "I'm not going to download an app from this anti-Muslim, dude." And I'm like, "But I don't see that guy. I see the dude that's dropping in with himself on a daily basis and really cares about mindfulness and staying neutral and calm and whatnot."
Again, with that multidimensionality, and I will say, for anybody listening, I haven't been following Sam as closely as I've been following Jordan, so I don't intend to create any comparison where they're or excessively overlap the Venn diagram. But yeah, if he's experiencing, getting critiqued for being anti-Muslim, I would say, okay, let's go in there. Like, where's that persecution programming? Where you're programmed to be persecuted, and you're also programmed to not witness people in their persecution, and clear that out so that that sticking point doesn't exist for him and for anybody that he's coming into contact with anymore.
I'm drawn to a couple of things that I'd like to kind of keep going down this little rabbit hole with you on. Hopefully I can take note on one of them. I also want to get back to A Course in Miracles, because Marianne Williamson's A Return to Love, which I think you listed as one of your top 5 favorite books of all time, or maybe at least a runner-up, like, changed the game for me. It changed my life. And but by the way, I don't think I'd vote for her for president of the United States. So that's a different story, and we can talk about that as well. I don't know how much time you have, but I guess I consider myself, like some people have described, this concept of a snag, a sensitive new age guy. It's like a derogatory comment towards, like, someone that's, like, both, like, a bro coming from, like, bro culture, and also, like, kind of navigating this new world that we came up in of again, quote unquote, identity politics, of recognizing that we have white privilege, and kind of navigating the fine line between wanting to do the right thing and also wanting to show up as a man in our own power, without shame and guilt. And so, I noticed one of the modules that you host and some of the work that you do is with men, specifically in the Me Too age. And I wanted to just, get your thoughts on that. Like, specifically, what is the line between recognition and awareness and saying, I see you, Black woman that has experienced generations and lifetimes of persecution at the hands of other white men, without saying, I'm guilty of this because I was born a certain way. Because the two concepts, kind of, to me, giving that forgiveness to someone else but not to yourself, to ourselves, is also multidimensional and contradictory. So just curious how you navigate that line.
Yeah, so what I would say here is that A Course in Miracles says a miracle can occur, right, in any moment, in any instant. So we can have a complete change of perception and experience in a moment, and often, but also change is a spiral in some ways. A Course in Miracles does not say that, but I say that change is a spiral. So, we may have a moment of clarity and relief and feel clear, and then it comes back around again. So I don't want to give the idea that we're that we're just like curing sexism and racism overnight, but we can experience really big shifts in small periods of time. What I would say is that it's this paradox where I see men needing both permission to own their masculine power much, much more, and to actually reclaim a healthy masculine archetype, and also getting more comfortable with why they feel so much guilt and shame. Because the systems that have set us up here, patriarchy, white supremacy, all of that, they harm you whether or not you're on the oppressor side or the oppressed side. And men are carrying, I mean, let's just even talk about the legacy of war and the rage, the existential rage that we carry within us of being sent somewhere, being told it was for the right reason, and doing horrible, horrible things that were just a violation of our humanity and everybody else's. And then in some cases, to realize, especially in an American context, like, was that war even necessary? And was it necessary to see that other person as an enemy? And so men have a lot of grief, and we do have a lot of shame. We do have, the shame of walking into a room and people saying, "Oh, F all men." That shame signature tracks back to a deep, deep collective shame of not being able to protect their families, of seeing violence done, of committing violence, of feeling bewilderingly separate from their essential nature and from everybody else, while doing the thing that was socially coded as the way to be the right kind of man. And so the bewilderment even of itself, this confusion of like, how do I do this? How do I become the right kind of person, the right kind of man, is part of the healing, is letting that confusion pass through your body, and not shying away from practices that allow you to release grief and shame and anger. And there's a balance between accepting blame in the moment, versus understanding that, like, maybe actually if we were to roll the tape, you didn't do anything to that specific person, but the two of you are playing out a dynamic where someone experiences harm and you do nothing about it. And you have a chance to validate the pain, and to not shy away from the pain that's showing up within you. Seeing even a moment where you're like, I don't know what you want me to do, as a moment of alchemical healing, where you can look at how many times have I felt within my lineage this confusion about what to do as a man, and how can I just be present to that, be the witness and the observer to this pattern, and understanding too that actually the more we lean into connection, the more free we get. And so even this idea that like there has to be an objective way to understand how wrong you were and how right they are, is still feeding this zero-sum mentality that says that like we can't all experience connection and ease at the same time, and that someone has to be wrong. And we have the opportunity to be brave enough to lean into greater love no matter where we fall along the spectrum. But those of us who have more quote unquote privilege, material access within the bodies that we're in right now, I do see that we're called to be the one who takes the first step, who shifts the dynamic to create the context in which someone who's used to being harmed by someone who looks like you can then soften into like, whoa, actually, maybe I am willing to have a new experience of this snag, this man, however we want to talk about it. And I reject that, like we don't need that. We don't need that acronym, I don't think. Yeah, does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. What's coming up for me right now is, we spoke earlier about the inability to convince, with the intention of convincing those who are closed off to certain ideas. And then, you carry, from my perspective, an extremely, positive view on people in the world and what we can transform into, just from having read some of your work and speaking to you now, but when I look at kind of the global scene right now, and I think about the inability to convince those who would listen to this conversation and immediately write it off, and there are probably, maybe billions.
Greetings to you all if you're still listening. I'm glad that you're here.
I'm just like thinking of, I'm thinking of our president, and the people who love him, and how do we move towards this idea of living with the dichotomy or the paradox of diversity and unity, when there is such a strong force rising, or that has risen, for the concept of separateness and zero sum.
So the way that I approach my work is just this constant, it's like this taproot energy of just like, what do I fundamentally know to be true about the world, even if I haven't seen evidence of it in a while, right? Love is the only real thing. Unity is the natural state of humanity. This was the Garden of Eden. We can bring it back. This this sense of what is really true, so that I'm not in this boggling mind logic debate about like, well, should we really try to all respect each other, or should we just like let each other go off our separate ways and all die separately in the apocalypse, in our own, in our own separate little containers, right? Happy with each other. I know that separation doesn't get me where I want to go. I know that separation just becomes more and more and more and more and more fracturing, where it's like more and more and more subgroups. And so I hold the intention of unity. And it's this art of mastering, looking at the world as it is right now, but staking a claim to how it could be. I really believe in the power of intention, because what's trying to come through is important. So the question of how do we hold this vision of unity when there's such a strong argument for separation, is knowing what's true about the world, knowing that unity is our natural state, which is why we're so enraged by separation, right? And knowing that it's not about getting to a place where we all have to, all of this like specificity of best practices, and you need to talk about it like this, and you need to use this word. All of that is external, moving around pieces on the chessboard for the emotional experience of feeling like someone is looking at you and they hold no fear, no shame, no disgust, no anger, no malintent in their heart towards you, right? And so it's this like, well, if you call me by the right pronouns, then I can trust you. But then even when people are calling people by the right pronouns, they still feel uneasy because they still haven't resolved this tension and this friction that they feel about fully witnessing someone and seeing them in their full humanity, no matter what the external trappings of their life might look like. And I also want to add in here, what's coming through very strongly is it's not this like pie in the sky, we're all happy, we're all, we're just like immediately going to this like utopian unity. But it is about like, what is our ultimate belief and destination? If I believe that scarcity and separation is just what we have to deal with as humanity, nothing about my experience is going to change. If I fully commit to saying, I know that unity, I know that harmony, I know that being able to wake up and feel at ease and have my needs met and look around the world and see everybody else having that experience as well, I know that's what we deserve. And so I'm staking my claim to that. I know that that's the only way that I'm going to experience even a measurable shift in my experience in my lifetime. I used to have this vision when I was a teenager. I was like, I saw myself at 60, 70 years old, basically in the apocalypse. And I was like, I'm going to be lucky if I have like an adequate weapon to defend my water supply from other humans. And now I'm like, by the time I'm 70, like, Yeah, I've got a lawn chair in a healed and hold planet waiting for me. Like that's my retirement. On this planet, we are okay. And knowing that by radically staking my claim to that, I begin to set in motion the events, the circumstances that allow that to happen. And often when we set a really powerful intention, love drives out all that is not itself. And so we've got a whole lot of not love happening right now, which to me indicates humanity's deep, deep, deep desire to experience love, because we're being shown it's like food poisoning. Like we're being shown what's been hurting us as it's on its way out. We've never had such intense polarization before. Quotation marks around that. That's a lot of people's experience right now. It's coming up because we're being asked to finally make amends for slavery, make amends for genocide, deal with discrimination, so that we can show up on the other side. And the piece that's coming through strongly as well is that love does not mean that we're BFF. Love means that I do not hold a hateful, fearful thought within my heart that I'm not wishing you ill. But I cannot wish you ill from an extremely far distance as well. This is not about, immediately just opening up and letting people who might hurt you into your life. It's about freeing yourself from the bondage of hating them and letting your life get a hell of a lot better really quickly when you do that, and knowing that the ripple effect of that is going to change the world.
Beautiful. I'm reminded of kind of the analogy of love as light. And, if you have a completely dark room and a little bit of light shines in, how it really just can light up the entire space. However, I'm also kind of, I'm also just kind of internally conflicted. I want to go back to Marianne Williamson, because you're familiar with her work, and she's also very, very outspoken about A Course in Miracles. I mean, I don't often talk about politics on this show, so I don't know why I keep coming back to this, but I'm just curious, like, would you vote for Marianne Williamson as the President of the United States?
Absolutely. And I had this little moment. My pause was, do I just say yes and then explain, or do I explain and then say yes? But I feel called, I feel called to just say yes right now, because she is that light in the dark. She has a completely new paradigm way of viewing politics. Even the people who are the most progressive do not see the world in the way that she sees it. They're mixing around chess pieces on the board. Their ego is really involved, and they're not dealing with the core metaphysical internal cause of all of our pain, which is fear, which is acculturated, conditioned fear, and an inability to look at why we're in this situation. And it's not just about like, okay, we need policies to allow, kids from immigrant families to go to college. It's like, how about we clean up our collective psyche that says that those kids don't deserve to go to college? How about we clean up our internal psyche that looks at someone's race and immediately assumes their competency level? And so I am deeply compelled by the work that she's doing. I don't place my faith in the future of humanity in existing structures, but I see her almost like in that first Star Wars movie, Episode 4, where they're going into the Death Star and they have to hit this precision hit. It's like, I honor her for going that far into the belly of the beast with what she knows to be true. I know that she's living her dharma she's living the path that she was meant to live by doing this. And I truly honor her for that. And the way that she speaks about it is like the primary role of the president is not implementation of policy, it's vision. Right? And she carries such a high frequency of a vision of love and truly backs it up also. And this is funny because I don't usually talk about politics these days either, but I'm like giving a pitch for Marianne Williamson. But what I'm really giving a pitch for is hope and love, and seeing love not as this cheesy thing, but as like the most badass revolutionary frequency that can and will change our world. And so I really honor her for what she's doing. And I see, I'm also just not willing to tell a pessimistic story, especially not yet this early in the process. I'm not willing to tell a story of, well, that's just how things are going to be. You know, these like C minus politicians are just, you know, they're going to say one thing and then they're still going to fund genocide in Yemen, and, you know, everything's going to stay the same. Like, from a purely selfish perspective, I love the feeling of hope and optimism and determination a lot more in my own body than I love being logical and rational and like, well, you know, I guess we're going to have to accept, you know, 20% world peace, you know, over 20 years and then 3% increase after that. It's like, I'm all in. And I love that she's all in too.
It's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
You know, I think the theme of this episode, and I might title it, I'm conflicted. I'm experiencing conflict, internal conflict. No, because again, you know, I did my yoga teacher training in 2014. The studio that I taught at had a book of quotations, and there was one page that I was constantly drawn to because we would do shavasana at the end of class, and students would be laying down, and it was kind of the ceremony at this studio that, you know, a quote would be read, and then there would be the ringing of the Tibetan singing bowl. And as a teacher, I would constantly just be evaluating this book and reading different quotes that inspired me. And there was this one page that I kept coming back to, and it was called Our Deepest Fear. And it was basically this poem within a broader book that I later discovered, like a year later, called A Return to Love by Marianne Williamson. And it just sang to me. And I would read it in class, and it would just the energy that I felt in that room would just shift. I'm getting chills just thinking about it right now. And the opening quote is, our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate, it is that we are great beyond measure. And I think she goes on to say something about it as our light, not our darkness, that most frightens us, or something like that. And yet, as someone that has that quote hammered into their head and has read that and shared that in her words with so many people, and who fundamentally shifted his own life and own path after reading A Return to Love, realizing that I was in a codependent relationship, where I applied to the belief that two incomplete people could come together and create a complete whole, rather than two whole people coming together and creating something even more, you know, than a complete, beautiful love. And made a lot of changes based on that fundamental shift in my perspective. And here I am with this person that I love running for president. And I'm just like, man, what are you doing, Marianne? There's a part of me that is just like, I cannot move past it, because I'm just seeing her in a room with Vladimir Putin. And it's like, I just imagine like the hypnotist trying to convince the like grumpy grandpa at the family event that like he's being hypnotized, and the grandpa's just sitting there, arms folded with his chin down and his furrowed brow, just being like, get out of my face, stupid hypnotist. You know, like how, you know, as someone that wants to fundamentally believe in the power of love, in my own actions, you know, and own beliefs, I'm finding that I'm laughing at someone who's using a platform of love to come at this other side, which is this strongman masculine kind of like power politics that I think the world we exist. And I don't think about it within the context of the United States. I think about it within the context of this global foreign affairs. Like I even posted on her Instagram, like, hey, Marianne, like, what are you going to do when you're sitting in a room with Xi Jinping talking about trade policy? Like, how is that going to happen? Because they're playing the zero-sum game. How do we play the game of abundance and love and light in a world that still is defined by zero-sum? I really struggle with that. And she's such a representation of this for me right now.
I love this question. Like on a human level, I'm just like honoring you for asking this question. First of all, that quote has been in my mind ever since since this morning. I knew I was going to be speaking to you, and I was like, of course he's bringing it up now. So it's been in the ether, and I love that quote. And it's, you know, she really speaks about like, you know, who am I to be amazing? It's like, who are you not to be amazing? That's one of the one of the pieces that I love there. And for me, this is where I actually get very logical. What is the alternative? Is the alternative, it's like, to me, it feels like staying in a relationship with someone who is not meeting your needs and is like kind of mean to you because you know you're not going to meet your soulmate for like 5 years. It's like, or staying in a, or like literally like staying in a room that smells bad because like you're going to have to walk to a better smelling room. You know, it's like my radicalism used to be about like, you need to change. You need to change your behavior, and you need to clean up your act, and you need to understand that you're hurting people. Now my radicalism is belief in the power of love and a commitment to not shifting my frequency based on the external circumstances. Something that comes to mind over and over and over again these days is, do not mistake your present experience as evidence of the present or a forecast of the future. It is merely an echo of the past passing through. So seeing the ripple effect of what we're experiencing right now is not what we're choosing to experience in this moment. It's what we thought and felt 2 seconds ago, yesterday, 5 years ago, 100 years ago. And so we're experiencing the collective effect of choices that are not aligned with who we really are. And then we're looking around and we're saying, well, I guess this is the best we can do from one perspective. I'm not saying that's what you're saying, but we're sort of looking at it as an evidence of our limitation rather than looking through it with our amazing like X-ray vision and just saying, this is all a mirage. Only love is real. And in the same way that if you've ever had an altercation with someone where you feel like they're being completely illogical and you're just like, no, I need you to wash your dishes. Or, you know, even talking to and we won't do the hierarchy thing of equating global politicians with children. Also, we can unpack that and say, why do we see children as inherently weak and all of that? Because they're actually amazing. But in the same way that like if a toddler is temper tantruming and they're like, I don't want to go to bed. And you're like, you have to go to bed. Like, you're a child, you need to sleep. Like, the logic of my argument is solid. It's solid. At some point tonight, you are going to be asleep, because that's what needs to happen, because that's what your body needs, right? And even if you don't sleep tonight, at some point in the next few nights, you're definitely going to sleep, because that's what you need. And we don't go down on the level and we argue and we consider, wait, is it even logical that I asked this toddler to sleep? Oh, like, am I even in the proper authority to tell this being what it needs to do? Like, we don't go to that level of questioning the premise of the frequency we're holding. We're just like, no. In the same way that like in a bar fight where someone's been, you know, inappropriate to someone, you're just like, I need you to back up. And it's like, you're clear. You need them to back up. You're in that frequency of truth of your reality, and it's not compromised. And eventually what happens is either they leave or the situation eventually shifts itself to reflect your vibration. The toddler's like, oh, and you look down and they're asleep. or the aggressive bro in the bar is eventually just like, okay, man, and leaves. And the whole energy of the bar is like, oh, like we have the catharsis and we feel better. And so when I see her head to head with Putin, it's going to be gnarly in certain ways, but she's not like, it's like, is she not qualified because she's not willing to go down to their level? Or is she eminently qualified because she's no longer willing to be in that conversation? And where, of course, she's going to make decisions. She's probably going to send people into, you know, troops, different places, right? If America gets attacked, she's going to attack back. She's still going to be in the current reality, just in the same way that you like still clean a house that you're going to move out of in a month. You don't just like let it become absolutely disgusting and like ignore it because you know you're leaving eventually. She's going to deal with the current reality while also holding the vision of where it's going to be. And I say that with utmost confidence because I know that to be true about her, and I know that to be true about my work and the medicine of A Course in Miracles, where it's like, I'm not going to turn away from the world as it is right now, but I'm not going to look at how it is as evidence of how it's always going to be. But I also honor the confusion of it, because it requires us to be comfortable with our power. It requires us to believe in love. It requires us to have hope in a world that gives us a lot of evidence to not hope. And it's a little bit of mental gymnastics. But in the same way, the last example I'll give, it's like, because as I said, mental, it's like we stay so mental. What if we drop into our heart? When you're like, I just saw that person and I know that they're my husband, or I know that they're my wife, or like they broke up with me, but like I just know, like I love them. I'm just gonna be here loving you. You go do what you gotta do, but you just know, like that guy in the Notebook, I'm gonna be here to scoop you up in the rain when you're ready, when you come back. And in this situation, we're all Ryan Gosling. But you have that purity of heart where you're just like, nothing logical can convince me out of loving you. And you just let it burn.
I'm just thinking about that bar fight situation, and I'm just like, what if this, like you step into your power and you're like, you leave and you get pummeled by the drunk dude at the bar, and then you've been an activist. Has that happened to you before?
Oh,
Have you
totally.
walked into places where you've been aligned in that loving energy and just were taken down physically, mentally, emotionally? And how do we stand up from that? And continue in a place of love when it's like the vacuum of love is so violent energetically.
Whew. And I got full body chills as I say this, because this was my reality, right? I am an LGBTQ person. Those words don't necessarily super resonate as like a core identification for me at this point in my life, but it's true about my experience that I moved through the world as, out of the norm in terms of gender roles and my presentation and how people saw me. And I got attacked all the time. I had people attack me on the subway saying, "Are you a boy or a girl?" I was harassed and experienced a huge amount of violence in workplaces, walking through the streets of New York City. Like, a lot of stuff happened to me. And it was actually that, it really, those situations are what taught me the alchemy of this moment, where it's like, love does not mean not fighting back. We're just on the Marianne thread right now, and she talks about the love of a mother bear, right? Who's like, I'm gonna go to the mat to defend my babies, right? I'm gonna maul you. Like, your life will be over if you cross this line. And so it's like, love is not, again, it's this breaking down of the zero sum. Wait, do I have a concept of love that means it's transactional and zero sum? So it's either like I give it and then it's kind of conciliatory, or like, can love and the frequency of love. I mean, Jesus walked into the temples and flipped the tables and screamed at people, because his love for truth compelled him to shake things up in that way, because people were being taken advantage of. And so I believe in taking the actions we need to take care of ourselves. I believe love looks differently in different moments. And it is about that power of knowing that even if someone is attacking you, A Course in Miracles says that nothing that is not love is real, and nothing that is not real can be harmed. And so, or can harm us. So knowing that even in that moment, that person who's raging against me, if I stand up for myself, they're not fundamentally able to touch what is good and true and real about me. And them raging against me is just evidence of illusion in the world, and is not, which doesn't mean I don't take the threat seriously, but it doesn't compromise my commitment to seeing us on the other side. And yeah, in that bar fight situation, you can defend yourself physically in a way that looks violent, and have that be a loving action as well. Because what's the alternative? Just to let someone hurt you? And like, no, you're not in your power at all. So I get that it's like, for anybody who's listening, it's like, ooh, this is a little bit of mental gymnastics in some way, but I always root back into like, what's the alternative? The alternative to not believing in the power of love in this situation is just feeling like I'm in a random universe where like violence makes complete sense and will just be part of my experience forever.
I appreciate that. Thank you for sharing that
Yeah.
perspective.
Thank you for asking. I'm like, your inquiry is so, it's really beautiful.
Thank you. I feel like, this has been a really powerful conversation. It's been one of the longer episodes that I've had. There's so much more that I'd love to speak with you about, and maybe we can do a follow-up one day.
Totally.
But I do want to be mindful of your time and also attention spans. We've already gone well beyond the average 7-second attention span of the human brain these days. But yeah, thank you so much, Aaron, for coming on. And I really, really appreciate you. And I'm super happy that we connected. So thank you.
Yeah, likewise. Thank you for having me. Thank you for your really open inquiry, like the willingness to ask questions that are about questioning the premise of logic that is what's familiar but isn't but doesn't sit completely well with you. So like diving into those paradoxes, and thank you for using your social media ascendancy to share to share these messages with the world.
Oh yeah, thank you. Yeah, my social media settings. I love that. All right, brother. Well, that's it. Thank you for listening. I hope that you enjoyed that episode, and I hope that you're enjoying the podcast. It's been a really fun ride so far. I just get so excited every time I meet some of these incredible people and just love sharing their stories and ideas with you all. You can learn more about the show at thelookuppodcast.com. That's THE, lookuppodcast.com. You can follow me on social media at Wark Meinstein, WARCMEINSTEIN, on both Twitter, Instagram, and Medium, and Facebook. We have a Facebook page for the show as well, The Lookup Podcast, on Facebook. So check us out. You can also subscribe to our mailing list on the website for more future updates. If there's anything from the show that you want to catch, I've posted that in the show links for you to check out. And if there's any way that I can improve, please let me know. Feel free to reach out. If you have any guest recommendations, please let me know. Other than a couple of individuals who are helping me out in the background, this is a passion project, and I'm always open to feedback and any kind of support. I want to thank Sam Palumbo and Patch Kid Music for the sound editing and the intro and outro song that he created. And I want to thank Hello There Collective for their support on my social media. You can check them out at hellotherecollective.com. All right, that's enough for me. I'm sure you're ready to go on to your next activity. Thank you for listening. And please come back again next week for another episode of the Lookup Podcast.